Okay, so I hope you can hear me well. Thanks everyone for joining. My name is Pedro Emerald. I work as a Deputy Director at Proforest. And this webinar was jointly prepared and is being jointly delivered by Proforest and UNDP. And the idea is to share with you some of what we have been doing in developing the soil toolkit, what it is all about, what kind of gaps it's trying to address, how we're developing it, and how it also helps us better engage with the private sector and help the private sector implement responsible sourcing policies around soil, deforestation, and human rights. I'm going to be leading this webinar. The idea is that really you participate, so please feel really free to interrupt me at any time, to make comments, questions. I think you can raise your hand even here. You can write us on the chat box, you can talk. To begin with, I would just ask you, as Pascal was saying, if you can open up your camera, if you can put yourself on mute, if you can turn off your cell phone, that would all be very much appreciated. I'm aware that not everyone has fantastic internet connection, so if it doesn't work for you to have video on this call, that's fine. If it does, it's better. So welcome, and Matthias and Pascal, would you like to make any comments?
Not at all. Just a big thank you for everyone to get up early or join us or stay late. And it's very nice to have all of you here. So we're excited to hear from you, Pedro, and we are in your hands.
Thank you. Any word from you, Matthias?
No, thank you everyone for coming. That's all.
Okay, fantastic. So I hope you can all see my screen, or at least the slide deck that I'm displaying on it. So moving on, this is the agenda of our conversation today. First of all, we are going to talk about make our introductions and talk about the webinar objectives. Then we're going to move on to an interactive session in which we're going to have a poll where you're going to be able to tell us where you're from, what commodities you work with the most, what geographies you're focusing on. Then we're going to go to the soil toolkit, what it is all about and why you're developing it. Then we can get back to you to another interactive section, a part of the session, to talk about other geographies and other commodities of interest in terms of developing new toolkits and thinking about what could be included in other toolkits and what specific geographies and what specific commodities we could be focusing these new toolkits on. And then we're going to go back to the soil toolkit work, in which we're going to touch on how we have been engaging with the private sector from the beginning, how we have been working to collaborate with other ongoing initiatives, and how we hope that at the end of the day, the soil toolkit will help companies implement their policy commitments and achieve some impact on the ground. And then go on to the final comments and remarks. Okay? So, where are we from and what commodities we work with? What do we have interest on? I'll pass it to Matthias, who runs this technology, so we can open up the polling system, and we can all respond to that.
Just one second, I'm having some issues, unfortunately. As every single webinar, there's always issues that come up. Let me check. One sec.
Somebody in the meantime can just entertain us, maybe a little singing or something.
Just to mention that we are also going to run a webinar for the Asia-based people in the near future. So we know that timing is always a challenge. The time is always a challenge, but our colleagues from the Malaysia office will run a similar webinar for people in a completely different time zone.
All right. So unfortunately, the polling is not working, but I would advise people to share on the chat box where you come from and what commodity you are most interested in. Could be beef, sugar, fisheries, whatever commodity you're working on, soy. Just type it on the chat box.
Matias, I'm gonna have to ask you, where is the chat box? Oh, no, I did.
Yeah. Okay. Cool.
No, I don't see it. Okay, so we see Liberia, oil palm, Paraguay, and soy. All commodities from Latin America and the Caribbean region. Brazil, sugar and beef. Fisheries, tuna, mahi, swordfish. Oh gosh. All commodities global. US beef, palm oil, and soy. Well, we got most of the usual suspects here, but also cotton. What else? Fish. Global Marine Commodities Project with several fisheries in Ecuador, Costa Rica, Indonesia, and Philippines. Brazilian soy, Paraguayan beef, Indonesian palm oil, West and Central African palm oil, pineapple, oil palm Africa from Yemen, Brazil, soy, Indonesia, and Liberia, palm oil, Paraguayan beef. Okay, fantastic. So we got the usual suspects and plus a couple more commodities of interest, cocoa as well. So since we don't have the polling system working, we're gonna need to figure out how to focus on some of these commodities as we advance on the webinar. Matias and Pascal, or rely on you to help us with that. Okay. Okay. So moving on, I hope you can see slide 4 of the slide deck. We know that a set of traders, food processors, and retailers have made commitments around how they source soy and how it should not be related to either deforestation, natural habitat conversion, and how human rights should be upheld in the supply chain. These commitments have been made mostly at the headquarter level of these companies, but they all need to be implemented where the commodities are produced and where these commodities are sourced from. And we know that there's a lot going on in terms of initiatives, either from the government or from the private sector or from NGOs or from multilateral organizations or from multi-stakeholders, multi-stakeholder groups to help address those challenges in implementing such policy commitments around soy, deforestation, and human rights. So this is just a glimpse of some of these initiatives, some of which are really fantastic. We got Global Forest Watch, we got Map Biomas, we got Soja Plus, we got the official information coming from MINP in Brazil, and a bunch of others. And we know it's daunting. It's daunting. We got Trace, which is also a fantastic initiative. So it's daunting even for us to keep track of everything that's going on. Now imagine for the companies whose main activities is not implement these policy commitments. The traders are there to buy and sell soy. Food processors are there to produce food with the commodities that they buy, and the retailers have their specific activities to focus on. So it's daunting for us. It's daunting for them. It's hard to keep track of all of this. but the fact is, there's a lot of good things going on, and very smart and committed people working to help companies implement their policy commitments. So how do we make sense out of all these initiatives? For soy, we have mapped over 50 initiatives focusing in Brazil. Some of them are useful for other geographies as well, but the main target for the soy toolkit now is Brazil. And the idea of the soy toolkit is that we help companies make sense of what is out there. What do each one of these initiatives deliver? What do they need to be engaged with? Are they for free? Would companies need to pay for them? And how each one of them will be useful in supporting the companies implementing the policy commitments that they already have. It's important to say that we are not asking companies to change the commitments that they have made. We are not discussing if those commitments are good or bad. We are just trying to show them what's out there to help them implement those policy commitments, whatever they are, right? So it's about implementing, building on these, some of these fantastic initiatives that are out there. It's also about bridging this knowledge gap between the headquarters, who usually make the calls and make the decisions about what the policy commitments will look like and what will be the key geographies for the implementation of the policies. And the regional offices, who at the end of the day are those who are on a daily basis trading, buying, producing, and who ultimately will need to embed social and environmental criteria in their procurement decisions. These people on the regional offices are usually much more aware of what's going on in the region, of what's possible of doing, of what's simply unrealistic. And the idea is that we not only help shed the light on what's out there, but that we also help them bridge this knowledge gap between those who make the calls and between those who implement the policy commitments. And this is the reality for soy. This is also the reality for other commodities, such as beef. It could be the reality for a set of other commodities and geographies. So this is one of the reasons why we wanted to bring to you the mechanics of the soy toolkit and to have you thinking if something like this could be relevant for other commodities and other geographies. So we have mapped over 50 initiatives. I would say maybe we have around 80 initiatives now mapped. And we are organizing these initiatives in a business-like rationale, with a language that makes sense for people working in the private sector. And we are trying to organize that around 5 specific elements as we see the policy commitments around sourcing commodities can be implemented. The first one entails assessing what your policy is, what the status of your policy implementation is, what the geography you're sourcing from looks like, and what's out there that can help you implement your policy commitments. It's also about ensuring that the right people have the mandate in your company to implement the commitment. Then one of the elements is about tracing the commodities back to the origin of where they are produced, and understanding the risks in the supply chain of having the policy commitments not being met. We're going to go into a little bit more details of these elements, but we also talk about how companies can engage with suppliers, what sort of programs, for instance, capacity building programs for producers are in place, what sort of joint efforts are in place pre-competitively to show companies how they can jointly engage with a group of producers or suppliers, what a purchase control system looks like. And this is very specific to some extent to Brazil, but maybe it's relevant for other countries as well. because there are some great things that companies have begun doing, building on automatic screening of the suppliers and building on official data and building on field visits and so on. So we are organizing our knowledge around these elements as well. And then another key element in the process to monitor, verify, and report internally and externally the progress that you have been making in implementing your policy commitment. So we are developing briefing notes, no longer the 10-page briefing notes, trying to get a hold of the most cutting-edge information for soy in each one of these elements. And this is all going to be in the public domain, and we are preparing webinars that are also going to be in the public domain to talk about them and to shed light on the resources and approaches that could be useful for companies in each one of these elements. So for instance, when we talk about risk analysis, the idea is that companies assess the risk of procuring commodities that are non-compliant with their policy commitments. And where the risk is higher, they engage with the suppliers to try to address that risk, to try to figure out if they are really not complying with the policy commitments, and to think through what could be done to either mitigate the risk or resolve issues that might be taking place. So one of the things that we are doing is showing every single data source that companies can use when sourcing soy from Brazil in this risk assessment process. We show the official sources that will show deforestation information in the Amazon, for instance, or natural ecosystems conversion in the Cerrado biome. We also show what NGOs have been producing, such as Map Biomas and Global Forest Watch. We also show some cutting-edge things developed by the government, such as the CICAR, which is a fantastic system that shows the boundaries of every single rural property in the country. So the idea is that in a very simple manner, we shed light on everything that's out there. And so companies can pick which ones best suit their needs and make use of them. And this is all around this element of risk analysis. And this is already in the public domain. If you check proforest.net/soy toolkit, you can download this briefing note. So diving a little bit deeper in what we're trying to show with the toolkit and taking the CICAR, this system as one example, as I was saying, this is an online, publicly available system that will show the boundaries of every single rural property in the country. It will, at some point, show if every single property is complying with the forest code, the Brazilian forest code, which is the main piece of legislation stating the amount of native vegetation that needs to be preserved on private properties in the country. And depending on the region you are, that could be up to 80% of your land. So it will show you information on every single property, and all you're going to need to have to access it is a number that you can ask a soybean producer in this case, right? So we want to shed light on initiatives such as this one, and for instance, on the resources that are available in English, in Mandarin, or in Spanish. So this could be used by people in Asia, in Europe, and elsewhere. The target audience of our toolkit are people sitting at headquarters. So any reactions to this point? Happy to receive questions and remarks. If not, we can move on to the other slide. Oh, thanks, Isabella, for sharing the link.
You can either write it on the chat box, or you can just unmute yourself and talk.
Pedro, this is Lara. Can you hear me?
Can hear just well, Laura. Lara.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for that. You had mentioned that this toolkit will be in the public domain. So I assume open source. Just sort of a question around like the technicality of how you keep it up to date, and I guess the resources needed in keeping something like this up to date if you're not charging for it, if it's in the public domain.
It's a very good question, Lara. So we got a couple of years more to run this project, but after that period is over, it's an open question. It's a very good question. We began thinking about what to do after that, but to be honest, we don't have an answer at this point. And it will need to be updated. This is a fast evolving landscape. And it's good that it is a fast evolving landscape. But the short answer is, after the project is over, we don't know.
Super, thanks. And just a final question on your list of initiatives. Do you sort of foresee providing any kind of weighting or preferences to certain data sets, or is that sort of entirely up to the companies to determine?
We are not going to criticize the initiative or the data sources, but we are going to try to show what they deliver, what they do not deliver, and provide some thoughts on how they can be used. So if a company wants to go beyond forest conversion, it will need to go beyond the data sets that only talk about forest, that also cover other types of vegetation such as savanna and others. So we are trying to be specific on what each one of these initiatives can help companies with, but we are not going to say that one is better than the other.
Okay, clear, thank you.
Pedro, it's Pascal here. A quick question. Did you apply any criteria to decide whether an initiative will be featured or will not be featured in your kit?
The short answer is yes. We are going to get on that when we talk about how we began this process. But in a nutshell, this was jointly, I would say this was jointly decided with companies we have been engaging with NGOs working in this agenda, and with solutions providers, with companies that have been trying to come up with solutions.
Okay, thank you.
I'm gonna get back to this point in a couple of minutes. Any other comments, remarks, questions? If not, I'll ask Matthias to help us with this, because the plan is that we're building on well, your interest and your geography of interest and your commodity of interest. The idea is that we would come up with a list of main geographies and commodities to keep on focusing as we move on with the webinar. Matthias, do you have some information for us on that?
All right, so there are two main commodities of interest in the people in this webinar, which is beef and soy. So I would say, Pascal, what do you think? Should we just keep people on the line as we are right now, or should we split people up?
And I have another question before Pascal answers. Is there a third commodity of interest?
Sugar.
Sugar. Because we could also talk about beef and sugar, since the soy toolkit. The soy is already somehow being addressed by this project.
I've got a question.
Go ahead.
Sorry, I got cut off from one point from the call, so I don't know if I missed it or if it's coming up. So tell me if that's the case. But as I look at your 5-point process, it strikes me that it's a sort of a relatively traditional sort of supply chain management approach, and it seems like a lot of actors in this in various different commodity spaces are seeing that this sort of approach is necessary but insufficient from a sustainable sourcing point of view, and that they now need to think much more about how to engage systemically to help create the enabling conditions. Hence, the popularity of jurisdictional approaches, landscape approaches, etc. But from what I see in your 5-element approach, I'm not seeing that sort of jumping out. If a company were to follow this approach, would it lead them to the conclusion they need to work in these multi-stakeholder approaches, or would it just lead them to try and manage their own supply chain more effectively?
So, Charlie, thanks for that comment. I'll try to address it with one example, and let's see if it answers your question. So one of the things that we are addressing when we talk about engaging with suppliers is how companies can jointly engage in a given geography they all source from, right? There are some pre-competitive initiatives being trialed, such as the Soy Buyers Coalition, right, which gathers critical mass from a lot of companies, basically from Europe, that source soy from Brazil, and they're trying to think how they can together focus on one specific geography and together help that geography improve, right? So it's a mix of supply chain management, but attempting to gather a collective effort and focusing on specific geographies, or if you may say, specific jurisdictions. So this is one of the things that we are also trying to address with the Soy Toolkit. There are other initiatives that we're going to touch on, such as the Produce, Conserve, and Include in the state of Mato Grosso, and a bunch of others that we have also met. So just to say that we are not forgetting the other means through which companies can try to promote some positive change and with whom they can engage with, but it's included somehow in this 5-element approach, and it would be fantastic if at some point you spot in one of our briefing notes that we're missing one of these important jurisdictional approaches or one of these relevant multi-stakeholder initiatives, because we will then be happy to include it in the toolkit.
So what would be the compare and contrast between what this approach is delivering and, say, something like the accountability framework? I mean, obviously this is soy specific, whereas the accountability framework isn't. Would it be fair to say this is more of a sort of a map of the territory that enables people to sort of navigate their own way through it, rather than a specific route that you suggest people take? It sort of provides them with the necessary information for decision making, but doesn't say you must follow this path.
Well, I cannot really compare it with the accountability framework. I can talk through the toolkit. We are also engaged in and working with the accountability framework, but I would take note of that and have an offline discussion about how things interact, if that's okay. If one of my colleagues
Sure.
wants to touch on that now, then it's okay. But just bearing in mind time, I would take note of it and talk about that later, if that's okay.
Isabel is trying to say something. Oh, Isabella.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you. Hi. Just to build on what Pedro was saying, in terms of the first topic you've mentioned, Charlie, the approach here, and I think the way that we are trying to look at this is from the company perspective. So from the company perspective, supply chain management, a process that goes through the steps of supply chain management makes sense. What we've done with the other approaches that are under use, we've tried to put them where they make sense for a company that is trying to manage its supply chain. Because it's not either or. It's not like the company should now stop doing supply chain management and should all go and do jurisdictional approaches, because that's not going to deliver either. So it is about making sure that they understand, for instance, when you're trying to engage suppliers, when it makes sense to do it one by one, when it makes sense to try and understand what's happening in the landscape, if the jurisdiction is already doing something that the company could engage with. So it may not be explicit, but it's embedded into the different tools and approaches that we've mapped out to try and organize it from a company perspective. And on the second point about the accountability framework, I guess the key purpose of the SOI toolkit is capacity building more than anything else. So it's not prescriptive. As Pedro was answering earlier, we're not making a judgment of whether this data source is better than that data source. We're just trying to lay out what's out there and what those things deliver and when it makes sense to make use of them. So if you will, the SOI toolkit can be one of the resources that the accountability framework points towards. And in fact, we've been sharing, we are part of it, part of the steering group and many of the drafting groups as well. So we're pretty much taking the work that we've done in terms of mapping out what's out there and feeding into the accountability framework as well. Not sure if that answers the
great, yeah.
question.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay. Any further comment or remark? Okay. All right. If not, let's move on to this slide. The idea, as I mentioned before, was that we would understand in this group what are the commodities of most interest and what are the geographies of most interest, and that we would among us think for these commodities, what kind of initiative is out there to help companies trace the commodities back to the origin, to help companies understand the supply chain risk, say it in the sugar or in the beef sector? What kind of landscape initiatives or jurisdictional approaches are out there that could help either the beef, the soy, or the sugar sectors? And what kind of supplier engagement initiatives are out there for these commodities as well? So the idea is that we think through this. We are not going to be able to have the groups and gathering the discussions, around the specific discussion groups. But I would ask you, please, to at least write down in the next 3 to 5 minutes, what you think is most relevant, if not for all these topics, 2 of them for the commodity that is of your interest and the geography that you're working on the most. So the ask is, pick a commodity, pick a geography, and think through at least 2 or 3 initiatives that would be really important, that it could help companies implement their sourcing policy around that commodity and geography over the next couple of minutes. Pascal, if you have any additional comments.
Yeah, no, just I think everyone works with your primary commodity and your primary geography, whether it's pineapple, fisheries, soy, or whatever commodity you're most interested in. And I've tried to summarize the question in the chat box. So focusing on initiatives that you know about supply chain mapping landscape initiative and engaging suppliers. And if you can write this in one single message in the chat box, it will be easier for us to process after and revert to you. Do your best. Over to you.
Oops. So I just shared with you one example. For Brazil, for beef, there is a really neat tool called AgroIdeal, developed under the Collaboration for Forest and Agriculture and led by TNC with the support of traders and other companies that can help people sourcing beef from Brazil understand risks in different geographies and plan for future work around that. Thanks, Gianni. She's talking about the roundtable on sustainable beef, the Brazilian roundtable. And they have developed a guide with indicators of sustainability in the supply chain that addresses different actors in the supply chain, in the beef supply chain. Whoa. So for seafood commodities, the fishery progress and fish source online platforms. And there is even a tool for seafood retailers. Supply chain, now in the process of tracking several new indicators related to implementation of company commitments. One of the intents of doing this exercise is to show what we did for the soy toolkit. We tried to gather the collective brain power of people working on a given commodity and in a given geography to think through what's out there and what's relevant, what's useful, and how companies can make use of these initiatives and resources. Costa Rica, National Platform for Sustainable Fisheries. And in Indonesia, focusing on palm, aspects for new toolkit, supply chain mapping, supply chain risk identification and management, and engaging with suppliers. And how the private sector can support the development of a sustainable sector, sustainable production across the whole sector. And of course, sustainability standards play a big role in all this. And we, for soy, we have mapped a set of sustainability standards, and we are trying to show each one of them will help deliver, how each one of them will help deliver on companies' policy commitments. So RTRS in soy, RSPO in palm, FSC in timber, etc. This is an important element. Then how to create a long-term relationship with suppliers, talking about soy in Brazil, and how to come up with incentives for farmers, which is a big challenge in the soy sector. Producing right platform, which allows monitoring and assessing specific farms and how they are improving on social, environmental, and production matters. Showing, raising awareness, right, among suppliers, what risks not addressing social, environmental concerns might pose to them. If I got it right, what Diana was saying. Anyway, I think we got a glimpse of how gathering the collective brain power of people working on a given geography and on a given commodity could help us map what's out there and begin thinking how these could be relevant in the process of not only delivering on companies' commitments, but also achieving sector-wide long-lasting impact and helping the entire sector improve. And then from the finance sector, so a comment in the finance sector perspective. Risks in financing a sector client in a particular geography. How to help companies combine the already known reactive tools for more positive and proactive engagement. So yes, this effort, and as I'm going to touch on the next slide, is not only about gathering the collective effort to think about the solutions, but also gathering the collective effort to collective brains to think about the key challenges. The Accountability Framework Initiative, providing a globally applicable guidance across high-risk commodities and geography based on common and agreed best practices, norms and definitions. It's definitely an important initiative. Okay.
Pedro?
I think we should move on, bearing in mind the time. Right,
Pedro,
Pascal?
I have just a question. In the process of identifying those initiatives you went through, did you notice a lot of overlap and, in fact, competing initiatives working on the same thing with slightly different approaches?
We did, and I'm going to talk about it on the next slide. So I'm going to move on, bearing in mind the time that we have left.
Great, go ahead.
So I'm going to touch on it, Pascal. Bear with me. So to develop the soy toolkit, we want to develop something that is as useful as possible for companies, right? As Isabella mentioned, this is a capacity building, mainly a capacity building activity. We are trying to shed light on what's out there so companies can pick themselves what they think works best for them. So we want to ask the companies what they thought were the key challenges, what they thought was working, what initiatives they thought were not working and why, what they thought was promising, what are the gaps that no one really knows how to address yet. So we had a scoping phase in which we went to talk to traders, the food industry, and to retailers to gather the main challenges and the main promising avenues that we could explore in a soy toolkit. We also went to talk to the NGOs and to solutions providers and to private companies trying to develop solutions to map everything that's out there already. So we went to talk to many NGOs working in this agenda, NGOs like TNC, Imaflora, WWF, and others. We went to talk to companies developing solutions, as I mentioned, like AgroTools, AgroSatellite, and others. So there's a wide array of companies and different organizations working in trying to help companies address the risks, but also implement their policy commitments in the soil supply chain. So this was a scoping phase. That's how we began with. And the scoping phase also included somehow aligning with other initiatives, what the toolkit was all about, because there are other initiatives engaging with the private sector. Some of them have the mandate to discuss the policy commitments that companies have made and trying to help companies improve the policy commitments that they have or change them to something different. Some other organizations might be providing services to the companies, right, in the process of implementing the policy commitments. So we engaged with as much as possible with these initiatives already going on to show how the soil toolkit was not to be a competitor in this arena, but rather try to complement everything that is going on already, and even shedding light on their initiative and on how their initiative could be useful. We know that that companies are approached by many different organizations, and that sometimes of course they don't have time to talk to everyone, and we don't want to overwhelm them with requests, because either because someone else is already making a very good request and we can chip on that, we can support that, or because simply they won't pay attention to what other organizations might be saying. So the idea was to clarify that we are not duplicating efforts. I think that's one key message. And we did not want to overwhelm companies with a new initiative, but rather shed light on the good things that are already taking place. So then we began drafting the content based on all those conversations, based on the scoping phase, based on our own work on supporting companies implement their policy commitments around a set of different commodities. And then this content was then sent for an external review. We sent it back for those with whom we talked in the beginning of the process to see if this what you were expecting. Does this help you implement your policy commitments? What's not working right here? What might be missing? And we sent it back not only to the companies that need to implement their policies, but also to those NGOs and tool developers and other players in this agenda, until we were able to get to a final version that, of course, is not going to solve everyone's problems, but at least we can say it's in the cutting edge of that discussion, and it even sheds light on what has not been addressed by anyone in the sector. It sheds light on what still needs further work, and maybe not from us, maybe not from one specific companies, but maybe collectively in a roundtable. Who knows? That could be focus of further work. So this has been the process, and this is a long process. I have to confess, it's much harder than simply doing a desk review and putting together a document that talks about the cutting edge technologies, because we really want to make it in a way that it meets what companies need, and that companies agree that it's a good thing, and that they can use, and that they can talk about it, and that they can really use when implementing their policy commitments. So this is all an ongoing process, right? And as someone mentioned before, this is going to need to be reviewed at a later point in the future. So we have the final versions of some of the elements, and we are close to the final version of some other ones. And in some cases, what we are coming up with is a concept paper for discussion, because not even the sector knows, for instance, what's the best way, for example, to monitor and report on progress in implementing the policy commitment. So there are many ongoing discussions about that, which is what I'm going to touch on the next slide. So we are delivering this content by putting the public domain briefing notes, by coming up with webinars, but also by tailoring to specific groups the sort of information that they need to help their conversations move forward. And this is one of the examples of what we are doing. So WBCSD has convened the Soft Commodities Forum, which gathers the main soy traders on the planet. And they are having a set of discussions around sustainability in the soy sector. And we are helping fertilize some of their discussions by shedding light, for instance, on what resources are available for them to monitor deforestation, natural habitat conversion, and how they could use those different resources in monitoring the implementation of the policy commitments. Because all these companies have policy commitments around soy and deforestation. So this is a very specific case in which we're tailoring the content of webinar, and I think that we have carried out, I don't know, maybe 5 webinars with them already, so they can move on with their discussions and come up with their solution on how to track and monitor the implementation of the supply chains. But they're going to come up with that knowing all these resources are available and making, we hope, a much more informed solution. And by this fertilization, if I may say so, process. And this is something that we can do with other groups of companies. We can do it with food manufacturers, we can do it with retailers, depending on the interest of companies and at what stage in that implementation process they are. We can tailor the content for their specific need. So this is, again, just another glimpse of organizations we've been engaging or hoping to engage with. We know they all play a very important role in this process. Someone mentioned the investor side of things, and we've been liaising with the CDP, and we agreed with them that, for instance, the material that we develop under the Soy Toolkit is going to be available on their platform. When companies get the report on how they score, there can be some recommendation on how to improve, and there's going to be a direct link with the Soy Toolkit information, which will show them a menu. It's going to be a one-stop shop of things that they can build on to improve. We know that there are some efforts being led by Solidaridad and WWF China, for instance, in developing this China Sustainable Soy Trade Platform. And we are engaging with them to also show what we're coming up with in the Soy Toolkit. We're going to have it all translated to Mandarin and sharing with them and letting them know that they can use this content the best way that suits their needs. The CFA, the Collaboration for Forest and Agriculture, the RTRS, and TRACE are all very relevant initiatives in this arena with whom we have been engaging with, again, to build on what's going on and to complement in the best way we can the initiatives as they see fits best. This is also something that we ask them in some cases. So how can we help you? What do you see as knowledge gaps, and what do you see as helping you with in terms of content development and capacity building as you engage with the private sector? So it's not that we are going to engage to do all the engagement. We are also going to help as much as we can people in their own engagement processes. Any comments or remarks, reactions to this point?
Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
I just wanted to make 2 comments on the choices we've made for the process for content development and for delivery. So for content development, since the purpose is capacity building, the idea of contacting the companies and starting discussing them and getting their views of what works, what doesn't, and sharing information about the things that we are considering, including all that. I think it has a value for the content itself, but it also starts to raise capacity of the people that we are engaging with. And also, I think, opening doors and raising interest for the content that is developed eventually. So that was one of the factors that we took into account when deciding for the kind of process for the development of the content. But then in terms of the delivery, as this slide shows, I think the results of the decision that we've made. At some point, we even talked about a soy roadshow. A few years back, we had done an RSPO roadshow in Africa, supported RSPO, and basically getting the word out there about what it was and what it meant and what was the content and how it could be used by governments and companies and growers. And that concept was what inspired us to start thinking about the soy toolkit, but in the opposite way. It wasn't a new production region that was in question. It was more about the headquarters being a bit detached from what was actually happening on the ground, and still having to make all the calls about it. So at some point we decided to drop the idea of the roadshow itself, because one of the key messages that we were getting in the soy sector was that there's just too much, right? There's an awful lot of initiatives and too many people, pushing in different directions and talking about perhaps the same thing with slightly different groups. And in the end, if we created something like a roadshow where we put our tent out and invite people, or put the bus on the road and start calling people to come and see the soy roadshow in terms of delivery, it would just add to the noise, be yet another initiative, yet something else that the companies would have to ask themselves, so what is this soy roadshow about? Should I go to that, or to an innovation forum? Should I go to that or the R2S conference? So we thought, you know what, that's not the purpose. What we really need is to make sure that this content gets to the right people, no matter where they are and how they got together. So that's why we started looking for partnerships in terms of the delivery, to try and tag along when they are already gathered, or support them with content for the things that they are developing. So I think we are yet to see the results of that. We're still, I think, just moving on to the delivery phase as we finalize the content development. But that's the rationale behind it.
Thanks, Isabella. And I think this connects well with our final remarks on the webinar. We should not overwhelm companies with requests. We should tag along the things that are already taking place, and these other engagements that are already happening with the private companies. We also thought it was key to include companies from the beginning, asking them what they thought was relevant, what they thought was useful. And again, we should engage with what is out there already and value them, right? Because some of these initiatives are really good, and in some cases, there is no need of another organization working on that specific activity. Now, a couple of questions for discussion. We don't need to go specifically over these questions, but some food for thought, right? Any potential synergies with the soy toolkit? One of the goals of this webinar was also to have you thinking not only about potential new toolkits, but also if you think about something that we can connect with this work, that we can tag along, please do let us know. We also want to hear from you what you know might be working elsewhere, and how maybe this soy toolkit work can be relevant for other ongoing work. Another question that I pose for you is if you would have any particular interest for a deep dive in the soil toolkit. Would you like to maybe have another webinar focusing on what we're doing on risk assessment, or maybe on what we're doing on supplier engagement and how we are connecting jurisdictional approaches to the supply chain work? So any particular interest that you can have, you can either say it now or send us a message later. And then again, what are the key commodities and geographies that could be focus of other toolkits? We, as Proforest, would be interested in developing other toolkits, for instance, for on the commodities and geographies that we work on, that we work with. So this is also food for thought, right? And explicitly mention that if you have ideas, do share with us, with UNDP, with WWF. I have to highlight as well that this work is being developed under the Good Growth Partnership in a very close collaboration with WWF, and as you saw, a set of other partners. So, and I would also invite Margaret, maybe if you want to mention something, Margaret, about this process as a whole. Now is the time.
Hi. Okay, sure. Yeah, so we're happy to be supporting the Soy Toolkit and Roadshow under the Demand Project in the Good Growth Partnership. And as I just said in the text or chat box, and as Pedro has discussed, some of the briefing notes are already being posted on the website. So feel free to have a look at those and see if you have any further deep dive questions related to any of those. We're happy to have a follow-up webinar through the Green Commodities community on any specific topic related to private sector engagement, related to jurisdictional sourcing. And we're, as Pedro has mentioned, we're just trying to make sure that this work is closely linked in with all of the other work in the deforestation-free and reduced deforestation commodities space. So yeah, I'm happy to, continue to be engaged and answer any questions going forward. There's still 2.5 years of this project, and we'll be looking at how to sustain it going forward after that. So thanks, everyone.
Yeah, it's Charlie O'Malley here. This is really interesting, and it sort of is similar to some of our own thinking in UNDP about how we can be most helpful, and I'll use my own language for it, but we're thinking about how we can play a useful role in terms of signposting for companies and sort of bringing market intelligence and signposting to companies across different commodities. Our focus is particularly at a country level, because that's our kind of key strength, is how do we help companies navigate the complexity in specific countries and specific commodities. But it continues to strike me how complex all of these issues are and all of these country contexts are. And even as professionals spending time full-time on this stuff, it's hard enough. So I do think a key sort of function we can serve for companies is to make the complexity as understandable and easy to navigate as possible. So I think that's kind of what you're doing in the soy space. So I think that's sort of incredibly helpful model that can be used in other commodities and other contexts. So I'd be interested to hear from people whether they also see that need in other commodities, in palm oil or beef, or some of the others on the line, sugar I saw was on there, and maybe 1 or 2 others, whether that level of complexity is also sort of getting in the way of effective action. Could similar work like this help in other sectors, or does it in fact already exist, and if so, where?
Pedro, thanks, Charlie. I think it would be very interesting to hear from people. Just, I'm curious. This is a very comprehensive piece of work that you've been working on for a couple of years, I understand, and still going. When it comes to replicability and for other commodities and other geographies, it's always good to have a vague idea of a bulk budget. How many digits are we talking about to develop that? Or what, roughly, you don't need to be specific, but it would be very interesting to know how much, what the kind of budget you've been looking at to do the initial research, develop the kit, and now promote it to a point where it becomes the tool you want it to be. If it's not too indiscreet.
I think it's very indiscreet. Is this a question for me, for Margaret, for Isabella?
Question for someone who has the answer. It's indicative for people who are thinking, yeah, that sounds good, but you know, is it like 100, 200, million, 800,000? What? Just a rough number. What's the resources that have been allocated to?
It's hard to tell. I mean, on top of my head, how much it costs to develop the content and how much it costs to deliver the content. Because the more resources you have to deliver, the more you will be able to engage with in conferences and with other groups that are already engaging with the private sector. So I don't know.
How many of you have been working on this for how long?
How many of us? Oh gosh, we have a big team. We have people from our Brazil staff working on these, and we have people based in Oxford working on these, and in the Netherlands, and in Switzerland, and in Malaysia. So it's and people are not. It's also a hard question, Pascal, because it's not like everyone is full time working on these. But I don't know, Margaret and Isabella, do you have comments on Pascal's questions?
Yeah, I would just say it's mostly a manpower issue, and so we've been supporting several staff, but like you say, Pedro, not everyone is working 100% on the soy toolkit, so it's difficult to say, but it does require, it's quite resource intensive. It does require a lot of staff putting in a lot of hours to both understand the space, doing their own desk research, and then also the engaging with companies is quite intensive too.
So I see there is interest in a soy toolkit for Paraguay. And IFRS definitely interested in linking the toolkit with the ESG toolkit I'm working on for the finance sector.
Pedro,
Okay.
on that, the soy toolkit idea for Paraguay. So, you know, you've been starting from scratch and developing the whole concept of a soy toolkit, the whole framework and everything. You know, that takes a lot to get it up and running. But, you know, how much time do you think it would take to go from here and where we've gotten with Brazilian soy to add a geography? Or, you know, it would probably take more time to add a different commodity. But what do you think about expanding to?
I think it's only natural. And I think that we, of course, can build on everything that has been done so far and that we are still planning on doing. And especially because these companies source soy from Brazil, but they also source from Paraguay, and they also source from Argentina. So at the end of the day, we would be focusing on a capacity building program for the same people, right? But shedding light on what's useful in different geographies where they source from. There's also interest in Costa Rica and fishery and pineapple platform. Oh, this is okay. Interest. Okay.
Hi, this is David from ICL Alliance. I just wanted to jump in with two quick questions. The first one is, I mean, first of all, I think it's a really interesting and useful toolkit. I was looking at the briefing around risk and the different tools and the mapping of the different tools that you've done. One question there is around if you have done some type of assessment around the credibility or the robustness of these different tools, because I think it's I think it's quite important to, first of all, as you did, map the different options and different mechanisms that companies can look at, but it might be useful to give them some kind of normative framework as well to evaluate how these different tools actually, how accurate they are, how good and credible the information is that they use, etc. So that would be one question around, have you looked at that, or is it really just showing what is out there, and then, kind of companies have to do their own due diligence, so to speak, on what tools and what, mapping and geospatial frameworks are useful. And then the second question would be, I think it's useful to break up the different cycles of the toolkit, but in a way they also interact a lot with each other, I imagine. So if you do risk assessment, the question then becomes, do you avoid risks in certain regions, and does that lead to a concentration of sourcing from, more risk-free zones, or do you invest in high-risk zones to basically resolve the risks? So, and I guess that then links to the question, some of the issues that might come up in the engaging suppliers part of the toolkit, etc. So I was just wondering if about those linkages between all the different parts in the toolkits, and if that's going to be something you're going to be looking at as well.
Okay. No, thanks for that, David. On your first point of credibility of the tools, and I would say that to some extent, well, not some extent, the information that is on the briefing notes has been curated by us and by the people who ended up reviewing that briefing note before it went to the public domain, and people working with GIS. In private companies have reviewed that briefing note. People from GIS groups and NGOs have reviewed that, and tool developers have reviewed that. So to some extent, it has been curated by external reviewers and by ourselves, right? But I hear you when you say maybe a framework to I'm not sure if I got it right how you put it, but a framework to us, the credibility of the tools is important. But the way we are doing it, we're not saying one is good or is bad, but it's being curated by ourselves and by the external reviewers of the briefing notes. Isabella wants to comment on that as well.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Just a brief comment. I mean, it's not Proforest's place to be judging those aspects of credibility, and it would require a fairly robust framework to be able to do it in an objective way. So we are counting on the views of multiple actors to be able to serve as sort of a proxy to what is credible in a sector. But I would just put the question back to you. I mean, that could be a task for ICO, right? Take the list and help us figure out what's good, what's bad in that.
Yeah, I'll note that down. But we can definitely have a further conversation about that. Thanks.
And on your second point, David, we are not saying to companies to avoid risky areas. On the contrary, and you got it right. We are showing how that can be connected with engagement activities that are already happening, right? How can companies promote some positive change on the ground by first focusing on the areas that most need help, right, or that most need focus on, and then connecting that with the initiatives that might be going on in that specific geography already. But then again, it's going to be a choice that companies are going to make themselves, how to deal with that risk.
Pedro, can I ask a question? There's something that I've been sort of trying to figure out how to articulate throughout this great workshop. Thank you so much for the presentation. It's been really interesting. We have at the Green Commodities Program a new initiative called Commitment to Action, which is helping governments and countries with mapping the deforestation free commitments that have been made, and then figuring out, like, you know, what those commitments are and then how to move towards acting on those commitments. And it's obviously really different to work with companies than with governments, but I wonder what sort of synergies there might be, or how to, you know, if there's a way to bring these pieces of work together. You know, we obviously work a lot in dialogue with all the different stakeholders, and so it would be interesting to see how this might sort of come together.
Thanks, Colin, for that. Not sure yet what the initiative is all about, but just to give an example of what we're doing with the Soy Toolkit on that matter. So the government in Brazil has been developing and devising strategies and developing tools to help track what's going on private properties and on specific geographies. We got the example of the National Space Research Institution monitoring the Amazon for over a decade now, with and releasing some very good information that companies can be using. We got the Brazilian Forest Service developing a new online platform which makes available a bunch of information across all the country for every single river property. So one of the things that we're trying to do is we are trying to build on these efforts from the government and show how the private sector can make really good use out of those initiatives in the process of implementing their supply chain commitments. We are also showing, for instance, what's going on in the state of Mato Grosso, where there is that the produce, conserve, and include jurisdictional approach, and how maybe companies can engage with that as well. Not sure if that answers your question, or if Isabella wants to comment on that. Yes.
Just very, very briefly, Colin, I think it's worth taking the conversation offline, but we were definitely interested to try and seek synergies and alignment in terms of content and the delivery strategies that others have. And there are several other initiatives trying to, I think, steer the companies in the right direction. So what we're trying to do is understand where they are, how far they've got in terms of developing the message that they want to put out, and the mechanisms that they're using to reach out to the companies, because we can exchange ideas in terms of the messages and perhaps support each other in terms of the reaching out and getting information to the right companies. So I think it would be really interesting to understand a bit more what you're doing, but perhaps not here.
Great. Yeah, I can put you in touch with the people that are working on that.
Thanks. And then I'll try to understand what.
Pedro, there's a question on the comments, on the chat.
Where is that? Okay, let me find the chat. Maya would like to ask, how would be the best approach to engage with existing initiatives? Because sometimes there is, here in Indonesia, it is a bit difficult in entering the existing initiatives because it's often assumed that will claim their work. Any recommendations on that would be, on what would be the best approach for the initial phase? Oh, this is a very good question. Well, I can tell you what we did here, but and Isabella can compliment on that. But we try to find the right people to talk to through the people we've been working with, right? And in some cases, we are already engaged in a set of initiatives, and we know people who are, if not leading, deeply involved on them. So we first engaged with the people who we know of and who knows us, or who knows someone we work with, to then get to the right person in that, and pretty much show what our process is all about, and to make it clear that we were not there to take anyone's place or to duplicate their efforts. And to be honest, it took time. It took time. Because only after we did that, we felt comfortable to engage, in some cases, with a specific group of companies or with something else that was going on. Margaret and Isabella can comment on that. They were part of this process from the beginning.
Yeah, that's definitely one of the reasons of the key reason for the delays that we've had at the beginning was just building that I think relationship and comfort around what we were doing. I think the key aspect there is to help whatever initiative you're trying to engage with, to see that what you're trying to do with something like this is improve their work, give more visibility to it, get others to get involved with what they're doing instead of claiming for yourself what they've achieved. So recognition of the successes of others makes this an initiative like this stronger, not weaker. So we're never ever trying to claim for ourselves anything that others have done, and it actually helps a lot when we're able to show where the pieces of the work that others have been working on fits into the puzzle. And sometimes it was helpful even for them. So for those developing the initiatives, because they're so focused in they've identified one gap and they're working to fix that one. And sometimes they lose sight of where does it fit in, and it also helped some of them to think through how they reach out to companies. So if we take an initiative that is about assessing risk, and they've been super busy with developing the different layers and the indicators and the methodology behind it, and at the end of the day, they still need to reach out to companies. They still need to make them use their tool. And by talking to us through the Soy Toolkit and where we see that they fit in, it also helped them improve their pitch and understand from a company perspective how and where they should be, who they should be targeting in terms of the kind of issue that the company is trying to solve. When does it come in, basically?
I would also add that it was about making it clear that by no means we were saying that at some point we would be engaging with all the companies and the companies that they were engaging with. And also by making it clear that they were to use the content in the processes and in their engagement processes. And we were by no means needing to go along with them. So we're going to come up with this content. You can use it the way it best suits you. If you want us to gather with you, we can go. If you want us to work on a webinar to have a deep dive on a specific topic, we will. If not, you can do it yourself with the material that we're going to come up with.
I would like just to say, just to make a time check, Pedro. We are 2 minutes away from 11 Panama time.
Okay, so I would just like to thank everyone for joining and for contributing so much to the webinar. I have to confess that I'm not used to these video webinars, but works nice, right? And please, if you want, do reach out to us. You can either send it to soytoolkit@proforest.net, a group of people in Proforest is going to be receiving the message, or you can send me a message directly if you have any follow-up topics you would like to talk about, or if there is interest in connecting these with something else that's going on, or if you read the material and you figure out that something is missing or can be improved. So please do reach out to us.
Thank you, Pedro. This is Pascal here for thanking everybody to joining this virtual workshop. I think this is a very good example of learning across commodities and geographies, and there will be more like this in the future. So keep an eye on the program. Thanks again, Pedro. Thanks again to the Proforest team, and have a good day, everybody. See you soon.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you, Pedro.
Cheers.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.
Goodbye.
Bye. Thank
Bye.
you.
Bye-bye.